The Spurgeon Library at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary has become the primary location for Spurgeon scholarship. It contains the bulk of Spurgeon's personal library, more than 6,000 volumes, as well as artifacts from his life such as his preaching rail, his writing desk, and even pews from the church where he was converted. The Spurgeon Library recently acquired the Spurgeon Heritage Collection, adding many more of his writings and personal belongings, including personal letters and minutes from the pastor's college, hundreds of newspaper clippings, as well as manuscripts from his sermons and books, plus many personal items and artifacts. On this episode, you'll hear from Geoff Chang, curator of the Spurgeon Library, about the items that they have, how they go about preserving and sharing them with a new generation, and why Spurgeon's legacy remains to this day. We'll also discuss his latest book release, Christ Our All, Poems from the Christian Pilgrim, which is a collection of Spurgeon's poetry. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Geoff Chang. All right, well, Geoff Chang, thanks so much for joining me for the podcast.
Clay, so good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Now, as we start things off, can you share a little bit about what is the Spurgeon Library and what do you have there?
Clay, have you been to the Spurgeon Library yet?
Not yet. It's on my to-do list very soon.
Where do you live, Clay?
I'm in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, so it's a bit of a drive, but it's not the other side of the planet.
So you're still in the Midwest, right?
Yep.
You can drive down here.
Road trip. I was looking at the conference you guys had recently. Was hoping to get there, but wasn't able to make it happen.
Yeah, come out in the spring next year. The Spurgeon Library. It's in Kansas City, Missouri. What we have here are Spurgeon's actual books. So if I were to walk out of my office here, I would take you to that main room, and we have a beautiful space housing 6,000 volumes of Spurgeon's pastoral library. When he was alive, he owned something like 12,000 volumes. After he died, his family was able to give away a good portion of the books, but they kept together kind of the heart of it, books of theology, his commentaries, the kinds of books that you would typically find in a pastor's study. Right? These are the books that Spurgeon used for pastoral ministry. Well, they are here in Kansas City, Missouri, and we have the privilege of housing them. We use them for research. That's what we have in the main collection of the Spurgeon Library.
Yeah, wow. And so you're the curator. What does that even mean? What does a curator of the Spurgeon Library do?
Yeah, so I oversee the work that we have here, which involves three components. We want to tell the story of his life and ministry. So the Spurgeon Library space is a kind of museum. We display his books. We also have all kinds of amazing artifacts from his life and ministry on display, different display plaques that tell those stories. We have these beautiful paintings that tell the story of his life. So I'm always thinking about, what are new displays that we can put out? How can we tell his story in a fresh way? That's part of my job. And then we are also a research center. So we regularly host scholars to come and do actual research and primary sources. If they're working on 19th century evangelicalism, if they're working on Spurgeon, this has become kind of the premier place for Spurgeon scholarship. So I give oversight to that. And I also head up the various research projects that we're working on in terms of publications, articles that we're producing, events, conferences, those kinds of things. So yeah, all three of those aspects I give oversight to.
Yeah, and it's a really beautiful space. I mean, I haven't gotten a chance to be in person, see a lot of pictures online. I'll throw some on the screen here as we're talking, but it is extremely well done. And you do have some things currently in the collection. We'll talk about what's on its way here soon, but you've got things in addition to his books, right? You've got like the preaching rail from where he would preach from in his sermons, right?
Yeah, we've got the preaching rail from his first church there in Water Beach. We've recently acquired the pulpit from the chapel where he was converted. So from the Colchester Primitive Methodist Church, where he heard the gospel and was saved. And so that very pulpit is sitting here in our room. We've got pews from that chapel also. We've got his writing desk. One of the favorite artifacts that we have is his cigar. We have one of the cigars that was found in his pocket after he died. And so people always like to come and look at that. All kinds of other wonderful things from his life.
His somewhat controversial habit as a Baptist that he was not shy about defending.
Yeah. That's true. It's probably the only piece of tobacco being displayed in any Southern Baptist seminary. So there you go.
I'm guessing so. Yeah, probably that's true. So you've got a lot of cool stuff. And the Spurgeon Library, I mean, how long has it been since this has really been a feature there at Midwestern? I mean, it's been a number of years now, right? Since that's been open?
Yeah, so we purchased the collection from William Jewell College in 2006.
Wow.
The Missouri Baptists were the ones who purchased the collection originally back in 1906. It came over to America. They housed it at their seminary, William Jewell College, and it stayed there. They took good care of it. But William Jewell has transitioned to be more of a liberal arts college rather than a seminary. So it just made sense for us to acquire it. We purchased it in 2006. And in 2015 is when we built that beautiful space
Hmm.
to really display it, to really take care of it. So yeah, that Spurgeon Library proper has been around since 2015.
Wow. It's a strange long journey from its home in London to make its way to
Mm-hmm.
the middle of the United States, but I'm glad you
Isn't
guys
that
have it.
amazing?
And certainly
Yeah.
been doing a great job stewarding those resources, making them
Mm.
available to people. And there's a lot more coming, right? You've got this Spurgeon Heritage Collection. Is that kind of what it's been termed?
Yeah, it's already here actually. So
Well,
it arrived last fall. So it's been it's coming up on a year. So Spurgeon's College UK, they own the Heritage Collection. They are the original pastors' college that Spurgeon founded. And as you can imagine, after he died, all of his papers, all of his documents, the things that his secretaries collected, all those were deposited with the pastors' college. So they began to build their collection of Spurgeon materials. And then over uh, the decades, as people had found more things, they would often just donate it to Spurgeon's College. So they built quite an amazing collection
wow.
there in the Heritage Collection. Um, so over the years, we've built a good relationship with them, and we've always we've sent our researchers to go over there to explore their collection. Again, just it's an amazing uh, collection. And as we've been talking with them more recently, they had some projects that they wanted to pursue. I'm so grateful that they didn't want to just let that collection dissolve and scatter to the wind
Yeah,
among a bunch of private collectors, but they wanted to keep it
right.
together and trust it to another evangelical institution. And so as we talked with them, we just saw, yeah, here's an opportunity for a wonderful partnership. So we worked the details out, and then last fall finalized those details, and then the collection came over to America. So you can imagine it as Spurgeon's study finally reunited. His study at Westwood, he had his books and he had his papers. And now his papers and his books are back together again in one place here in Kansas City, Missouri, of all places, at Midwestern Seminary.
No, that's great. So obviously, I mean, it's been a few years since Spurgeon passed. So they've been holding this collection and clearly escaped some of the challenges that go with that. You know, the tabernacle burned what, twice since Spurgeon's death, and so a lot, no doubt, was lost there. So it sounds like they were able to really avoid some of the challenges that come with having this historical items for such a long time.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for them. They have done a good job of preserving the materials, organizing it, cataloging it. So when we went to go look at it, it was in great shape. I am grateful for all that they invested in preserving and organizing all those materials.
And what does that look like? So, what is in this collection that's particularly just of interest to those that are interested in Spurgeon?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much. This is going to be of interest to scholars. Again, we have so many of his sermon manuscripts, his the outlines that he used when preaching. We have a lot of material related to the pastor's college, obviously, from his day. Books of student enrollment, of accounting. We have these amazing discussion minute books. As students got together to have theological discussions,
Wow.
and so there's a record of those conversations. Uh, his secretaries would clip any article that they could find having to do with Spurgeon, and they would collect them in these large folio binders. So, yeah, we have just shelves upon shelves of newspaper clippings. So,
Wow.
for those who are wanting to study Spurgeon in his 19th century context, understanding what people were saying about him, I mean, they've done the work for you in collecting those articles.
That's amazing. And there's a few things from his youth, correct? Is there not something from when he wrote when he was quite young?
Yeah, so the lost sermons that we published here, those very first sermons that we preached, that's in that collection. So the original
Wonderful.
notebooks that he preached from. But you're right. There's also another more lesser known sort of essay that he wrote as a 15-year-old on, let's just say, on his opposition to the Roman Catholic Church. Uh, and so that essay is in the collection also.
Bold at 15.
Yes.
So how nervous is everybody as that's coming across? I assume on a boat. How did that get from Spurgeon College in UK to Midwestern? Is it flown over? You got somebody with things handcuffed to their wrist? What does that look like?
No, we worked with a shipping company, and they were professional. They did an excellent job of wrapping everything, making sure everything was protected. Because in addition to the papers and books, there were also artifacts. Like we have Spurgeon's chair from his dining room. I mean, things, just pieces of furniture. So they just did a great job wrapping everything up, uh, packing it in these large crates. So if you've ever seen Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's it's coming over in these crates, like in the end of the movie there. And that all got shipped over by plane, not thankfully
Wow.
not by boat.
Yeah.
Uh,
A little,
so
little
so
less
we,
nervous,
we
a little bit faster.
that's
Yeah.
right, that's right. So we were able to receive it here.
And did that come in kind of piecemeal, or was there just one big fun day where you're getting box after box of this stuff?
Yeah, it was one big fun day. Yeah, it was a very exciting day. When the truck arrived and these crates are being unloaded and we're opening them up. Yeah, that was very memorable.
But that represents a lot of work, right? So what does it look like on your end, particularly being the curator, but no doubt you've got a team of folks there to help you. When you bring all these artifacts, all these writings, what does the work look like to categorize, preserve, maybe even digitize some of this stuff?
Yeah, so I'm grateful for these institutions who previously held to these items. William Jewell, Spurgeon's College UK, they've done a great job of sorting, of cataloging. So at this point, we've maintained kind of their system of organization. So the challenge for us is more of sort of on the part of understanding what we have, uh, researching, going through the materials, uh, making sure that they are accessible to people who need to have access to them. We certainly want to do the work of preservation. Part of what that means is in terms of security and access. We don't make these items just publicly available. People can't just pull one of Spurgeon's books off the shelf. They're all locked. But for those who have reason to access these books, we do make them available. We also want to preserve them in terms of the condition of the products, right? So we do keep things like temperature and humidity in mind, lighting, even light coming in from the outside, making sure that it's not going to be damaging in terms of the UV to
Right.
the items. So yeah, we're always thinking about how to maintain these things. It's a stewardship. We want these items. They're not just like matters for our curiosity. We really do see this as a resource for the church. We want pastors and future generations to be able to benefit from the ministry, the life, the work of Spurgeon. There are still many more insights to be had, to be gleaned from all that he went through. We have researchers who are working on that, but we want to make sure that we can make these items available for many, many future generations.
Yeah, because we're talking old stuff. Yes, they're of current interest because Spurgeon is kind of perennial interest, it seems. But
Right.
this stuff, I mean, is what from the 1850s, 1860s onward that you're bringing in, and plus that you have already.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, 19th century. As a historian, 19th century still feels very recent.
Yeah,
And we certainly have some books of his that are much older than the 19th century. He was
right.
something of a rare book collector, and those books, will need to be handled very carefully.
Yeah.
He particularly has a lot of first edition Puritan works, so stuff going back to the 17th century. Uh, but yes, these things are aging, and we want to take good care of them.
So the no food or drink rule is probably especially in effect at the Spurgeon Library as compared to your local library.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
So some of these things have not really been seen before, right? Have not been published or not publicly known, thinking of things like some letters and other early writings.
Yeah, some of these things. That's correct. We have manuscripts that have never been published before, of lectures that he's given, of sermons that he's given. Certainly letters, certainly some documents. Yeah, so some of these things. The Spurgeon, the Heritage Collection was accessible when it was at Spurgeon's College, UK, but mostly it was researchers going in there. So, and they're going to be more selective in terms of what they use.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just so much there. There's no way that you know anybody had sort of the time to go through it all.
Well, wonderful. Really hoping to go and see that. Encourage others to, either from a distance, check out the website for the Spurgeon Library. A lot of great resources there, and more coming out all the time. But you've got lots of opportunities for people to come down, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I'm happy to give a plug, especially to folks who are thinking about doctoral studies. If you're a pastor and you want to continue being a pastor, you're committed to that, but you're wanting to grow in terms of your study of church history and your writing and your research. I've found my doctoral work to be hugely helpful to my own growth as a pastor and as a preacher. But let me commend Spurgeon as potentially a topic for study. What as I was thinking about a topic for myself, I just thought, what better person would I rather hang out with for 4 years than Charles Spurgeon, right? Reading his
Yeah.
sermons, understanding his ministry, and those things all proved to be hugely encouraging to me. So, for those of you contemplating further studies, especially doctoral work, I think Midwestern offers something unique given what we have here, and you can make a real contribution to Spurgeon scholarship.
Absolutely. I'll be sure to link to some of those resources that kind of help people examine that a little bit closer if that's really of interest to them. I'll put that in the show notes here for this episode. So part of what you're doing as curator, obviously you're teaching over at Midwestern as well, but you're not only, preserving and displaying and making available Spurgeon's work, you're also publishing a lot of things. There's been
Yeah.
some, previous conversation you and I had on your book, Spurgeon the Pastor, and really
Mm.
oddly enough, not something that was really examined that much. We just think of
Mhm.
Spurgeon as this preaching machine, but he was a pastor, and we had a chance to talk about that. You've got a new book out that really gathers together Spurgeon's poetry, Christ Our All, Poems for the Christian Pilgrim. Most people are not that familiar that Spurgeon wrote poems and hymns as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we've just published this volume. We have in here in our collection a little notebook with 180 handwritten poems.
Wow.
These are all from Spurgeon. You're right. Not many people know about the existence of that notebook or of Spurgeon's love of poetry. Though, if you read carefully, if you're familiar at all with his work, it'll start to make sense. If you read his preaching, his love of hymns really comes out. He's always quoting hymns to
Yep.
illustrate the points that he's making. You know that he's pulled together his own hymn book, right? There's that volume, Our Own Hymn Book,
Mm-hmm.
that his church used in their singing. So he was the one who compiled that together. He was the one who always organized the singing for his services. He picked each hymn that they would sing, and sometimes that's published in the sermons. And if you're really sort of you're really familiar with Spurgeon, you'll know that he published a few poems early on in his ministry there in the Sword and the Trowel.
Sure.
But,
Sure.
but so we're not surprised that he would have a notebook of poems. But you're right. I mean, he's not known primarily for his poetry because he was a preacher. He was committed to his preaching. He didn't want, he loved poetry himself. He was a avid reader of them. He knew how to critique poetry, but he understood himself primarily to be a preacher, and that's what he wanted to give himself to.
Yeah. So it's not that he was without talent as a poet. It's just his skill set as an expositor, as a preacher, just overshadowed any skills he had as a poet.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
But
maybe he's
even
really good
when
at
you read his-
badminton too. We just don't know.
yeah, that's right. But when you read his sermons, I mean, he is very poetic, isn't he?
Yeah.
His use of language, his imagery, all those things. I mean, he is wired to think like a poet,
Yeah.
even as a preacher.
And that's something that people often mention, both, contemporary to Spurgeon and now is, what do you like about Spurgeon's preaching? He's so clear. I don't
Mm,
know if somebody might use the word poetic, but I think that's essentially what they're getting at when they're
mhm.
talking about his use of language and how he brings, these images to mind and these short, pithy illustrations.
Yeah,
You
that's right.
you can see the poet in Spurgeon.
Yeah, so we've sort of tried to bring that side out, in this volume. This notebook of his poems. These are clearly devotional poems. These are poems that he wrote for his own edification as he meditated on Scripture. They're all over. He covers primarily just kind of Christian biblical themes, right? Meditating on the character of God, on His faithfulness, on the Christian life, on the struggles that we face. I highlighted the theme of Pilgrim because, uh, like so many hymns that we sing, so many of Spurgeon's poems end with a reflection on heaven. Right? He's always looking towards his final hope in heaven.
Yeah.
So we see that a lot in these poems. But yeah,
So
he this was a devotional tool for him.
So some things you mentioned were published in his lifetime. Do you have any indication that he ever intended to gather these up at some point? Had he, lived longer than he did and make them available, or does this kind of represent a little bit of a side hobby interest of Spurgeon's? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it was kind of a side hobby. This is just a personal way to meditate on Scripture and pray. I think he would find time to do this just sort of on his own devotional time. As far as his plans for these poems, it's clear that this notebook was sort of compiled probably towards the end of his life. Uh, he, you can tell from some of the descriptions on the poems that they were written at varying points throughout his life and ministry. But then these poems have now been collected into one notebook towards
Okay.
the end. So whether they've done that just to preserve them or whether his secretary did that to get it ready for publication, I'm not sure.
Sure.
But it's clear that this is a collection of poems kind of from many different points of his life. The
Wow.
handwriting is all even, which shows that they were kind of written in one sitting, but the sort of labels on the poems show that they come from different periods and different dates of his life.
Yeah, a lot to be thankful for the work that some previous people did, maybe really unknowing that it's going to turn into something larger. You got somebody, cutting
Yeah,
and pasting newspaper
that's right.
articles for years in a book, and now just a tremendous resource that is. And someone, for one reason or another, maybe they just wanted to make sure those things weren't lost. Maybe it was for their, own personal connection to Spurgeon, gathered these things up, and now you're able to make this available to everybody else. So, what do you think? What do you hope, rather, that folks are going to get out of reading this collection of Spurgeon's poems?
Yeah, I hope you'll be edified, as you read Spurgeon's reflections. I see this in the vein of tools like Valley of Vision, right? Morning and evening. These are just rich devotional resources from church history. So for in your own edification, in your own quiet time, having someone to help you meditate on Scripture, to encourage you, this is a great resource. I think Spurgeon is also a model because this is his sort of prayer and Scripture meditation. So if nothing else, seeing Spurgeon's example, I hope that will encourage you in your own prayer life, in your own meditation. Because poetry just forces you to think about Scripture more deeply, to think about ways in which you want to communicate that. And maybe a third thing would be uh, just the power of communicating the truths of Scripture beautifully. Right? We do want to communicate Scripture accurately and truthfully, but there's also great value in communicating it beautifully in a way that engages the affections. And Spurgeon does that here through his poetry. So yeah, let him be a model to you in that.
And a model in using our free time, no doubt, because Spurgeon wasn't exactly full on free minutes. He was a very
So
busy
true.
person, and yet in whatever capacity that he had, whether it was times of personal devotion or maybe he's bouncing around in a carriage, I don't know. He's taking that time to dwell on the things of God and to capture his thoughts and articulate them, as you said, in a beautiful way. So another encouragement there is just, okay, what are we doing with our free time? Are we just mindlessly scrolling, or are we meditating on truth?
Yeah, so true. There's one poem where it seems like he's sitting in a waiting room at a shop, and it seems like he's just shared the gospel with the store owner, but the store owner has sort of declined, turned him down, not believing. So he's written a poem, kind of reflecting on that experience, sitting in the waiting room. So you're exactly right. I mean, what a great example of making the most of our time.
So, Midwestern, the Spurgeon Library, you've done a lot to create this home for Spurgeon scholarship. And I got to talk with Alex DePrima a little while ago. He's got a new biography out. I've talked to, Ray Rhodes has no doubt been there digging through books at particular times and others and studying for doctoral theses and thesi, whatever that word is, of plural thesis. Why is Spurgeon still of such great interest today to so many people?
Yeah, especially for Baptists, especially from those who come from kind of Baptistic backgrounds. Spurgeon's our guy. I mean, uh, for whatever reason, I mean, we look to him in many ways like the Presbyterians might look to Calvin. He represents our tradition well. He's a faithful evangelist. He loves the local church. He's a local church pastor. I think him being a local church pastor uh, has made him just eminently relatable. He's down to earth. Yes, he's a celebrity preacher. Yes, he was a famous author. He founded orphanages. Started a pastor's college. But at the end of the day, his ministry was that of a normal Baptist pastor, and in that way we can relate to him. We understand what he was about. And those aspects of his ministry, like preaching, like writing, like mercy ministry and pastoral training. These are all things that we are passionate about, even in our smaller ways, right? These are things that churches want to be pursuing. So he's relevant. His sermons, his publications, I mean, they're also engaging, so helpful for young Christians, for advanced Christians. He continues to be a helpful teacher and guide. And then I would say also the story of his life. For those who have read his story and maybe a short biography, maybe Alex's new biography, I mean, you just come to see a wonderful story of an unlikely underdog type of person that God used in a remarkable way,
Yeah.
uh, which displays the power of God, really. Not anything special about Spurgeon, but really God's ability to do far above what we could imagine. His stand in the downgrade controversy continues to resound. That inspiring stand that he took against error, even when everyone around him and the whole culture seemed to be going in a different direction, seemed to be going against him. That continues to inspire Christians today.
Yeah.
And so his story is worth telling. So for all those reasons, Spurgeon remains so helpful, so relevant for us today.
Yeah. And you really can't pick up anything of Spurgeon's without him pointing you to Jesus. And that
Amen.
was his stated goal in all things. So I think when we do have this interest in Spurgeon and reading his books and reading about him, I think in some ways you avoid some of the pitfalls in maybe gaining interest in other historical characters and people, church history or otherwise, where he's pointing away from himself. He's pointing towards Christ all the time. So, yes, you might be reading something about or by Spurgeon, but ultimately he is showing you Jesus. He's displaying the gospel for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So you've got the Spurgeon collection there. You've added to it with the Heritage Collection. You've got Spurgeon's books. You've got pews and preaching rails and pulpits and cigars and publications coming out. All these things. So you seem definitely very busy over there at the Spurgeon Library. Is there anything on the horizon? Something that is that coming up that you guys are still looking forward to, just making available to everyone?
Yeah, so I'll mention a few things, particularly publications. So this fall, a new publication is coming out. It's actually my dissertation that I worked on uh, here at Midwestern. It's called "The Army of God: Spurgeon's Vision for the Church." So Spurgeon, the pastor, was more of his sort of a practical guide to his pastoral ministry, right, aimed at pastors. This work, "The Army of God," is more of his ecclesiology. It's written from a more academic perspective, examining his rootedness in the Reformed tradition. I draw heavily from the minute books there at the Metropolitan Tabernacle. And it's part of a new series that I'm editing called Spurgeon's Legacy. So we're going to be taking scholarly studies of Spurgeon and kind of making them available. So this is going to be the first volume in that series, put out by Christian Focus. So be on the lookout for that. The Army of God, Spurgeon's Vision for the Church. So if you like Spurgeon the pastor, this would be a great sort of second, more deep dive into his ecclesiology. The other big project is we are partnering with Reformation Heritage Books to republish all 63 volumes of his sermons. And so this fall, the first set is coming out, which is the New Park Street Pulpit, volumes 1 through 6, being made available for the first time in decades, right? So they can now be purchased from Reformation Heritage Books. We're so grateful for our partnership with them. And the remaining volumes will come out then in 4 more box sets in the next 2-3 years.
Wonderful.
So really excited about that. Yeah, huge undertaking. So again, huge kudos to Reformation Heritage Books. Their passion to see these sermons available for a new generation of pastors and preachers. And then third of all, we're starting work here at the Spurgeon Library on a new series of devotionals. So we're working with New Growth Press to create these sort of 30-day devotionals taken from Spurgeon's sermons and writings. So the very first one is coming out later this fall. It's called A Wondrous Mystery, and it's an Advent devotional drawing from Spurgeon's Christmas sermons. So Spurgeon loved Christmas. He loved all the traditions and gift giving and all those things, but most of all, he loved the theology of the incarnation.
Yeah.
Right. So this devotional will help us meditate on the coming of Christ, a great way to prepare our hearts for that celebration.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to those things coming out. Maybe we'll have another conversation down the road as those things become available. Our guest for this episode has been Geoff Chang. He is the curator of the Spurgeon Library at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Geoff, thanks so much for joining me again.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Spurgeon Legacy Podcast. My guest was Geoff Chang, curator at the Spurgeon Library at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. I encourage you to check out everything the Spurgeon Library has going on, all the resources that they are putting out at spurgeon.org. Also, pick up a copy of Geoff Chang's book, Christ Our All, this collection of C.H. Spurgeon's poems. I'll be sure to link to those things in the show notes. And as always, for more episodes of the Spurgeon Legacy Podcast and other resources by and about the Prince of Preachers, check out chspurgeon.com.